And in recording that, we'll also capture the questions that you have. We very much welcome any suggestions or ideas that you have tried in your local association that you think that ought to be shared more widely. And we're also interested in if there are resources that you feel need to be developed for the system. So the chat box is a really good tool for us to collect that, but certainly you're welcome to contact us after the presentation, any one of us. I'm Sarah Dayton. I think Celeste Carmichael and Kim Fleming may be on this morning listening in for a few minutes. They have other things they may have to attend to. And I know Eduardo Gonzalez is currently engaged in another meeting, but we're all available to you if you have questions. I will be watching the chat box, and but if I miss something, just keep trying, and I'll get back to it. The other thing is one of the quirky things about the chat box is oftentimes people end up sending things to me privately or to the presenter privately, and you actually have to hit the drop-down box and then go up so that you're responding to all participants. And it makes a big difference for everyone to be able to see the questions, unless it's something that you'd like to have private, and that's perfectly okay too. There are lots of times where someone would like to ask a question and it's a little awkward to ask it publicly, and so we absolutely welcome a private question if that's the best way to go. Do let me know if you have any challenges hearing, or if I'm going too slow, or if my voice is too soft or too loud. So I want to draw your attention to the fact that the title of this presentation is Title VI, Civil Rights Responsibilities for CCE. Those of you who have been around for a couple years know that we had a civil rights audit in 2009, and one of the challenges is that we called our training diversity training, and the auditors wanted us to make the distinction that this is Title VI training, which is broader than diversity training, and it's also focused on legal compliance. And that's another important aspect about this training, is that it's very focused on legal compliance, which is really just a foundational piece of the work that we do. So it's really a starting point, a launching point. It's not the end point of the work that we do, but it is the most basic legal training and compliance training that we have. And I'm hearing that the phone is just a teeny bit garbled. And so I'm really sorry about that, and I will try to speak up. Give me a little feedback in just a minute and let me know if it's getting any better. So I'll just go through. I'm Sarah Dayton. I'm Assistant Director, Organizational Development Accountability. That includes program development, professional development, civil rights, compliance, and financial accountability for our audit procedures. Kim Fleming is our Professional Development Specialist and is the lead for Professional Development. Eduardo Gonzalez is our State Diversity Specialist. He's also a Research Link Specialist, Liaison, and he's also a Statewide Youth Specialist, but I've only attended to the Statewide Diversity Specialist on this particular slide. And Celeste Carmichael is our Program Development and Accountability Specialist and is the lead for Program Development and Accountability and the reporting procedures that we have to follow. So today we'll be reviewing again those Title VI Civil Rights Basics. I'll review some of the resources that we have available to the system, and then there will be opportunity to have questions and answers both now and again. You can contact us anytime with any question, and we really welcome those questions because it's really important. This is hard work, and sometimes it's sort of complex. Sometimes what makes sense logically or practically doesn't make sense from a legal or compliance point of view, and sometimes it's hard to navigate that, and we're happy to help do that. And again, please do use the chat box, suggestions, requests, and questions. So the overview of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, it was enacted as part of landmark civil rights legislation in the 1960s. Certainly, there was a tremendous amount of effort to improve the civil rights of all citizens well before the 1960s, but this is when it was finally passed in the United States. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, And there are the race categories, and if I try to do them now, I'm sure I'll stumble. White, Black, Asian, Native American, that can be Indian or Eskimo, Pacific Islander, and then we have a category of other, which is multiple races. It's really important to understand that an individual should self-identify, whether it's an employee or a program participant. And if a person wants to identify them in a certain way, there's never any reason for us to say, no, you don't look that way, or I think you're this. Let people choose what they are. If you have a registration opportunity where you can ask people the direct question to fill out their race, gender, and ethnicity, great. There are times when you have such a large group that you just have to make a good guess, and that's okay too. Lots of times, for example, with our nutrition programs and our 4-H programs, there's a very consistent registration process, and that's great, but sometimes our programs are big, not a lot of educators involved, and it's just a lot to handle, and we understand that. The federal government does expect us to do our best in collecting that information. The basis of color has to do with the depth of color of an individual's skin, and there used to be what was referred to as a paper bag test, whether a person was lighter or darker than a paper bag, which is, you know, pretty extraordinary to think about these days, but there was a judgment of people on how dark they were, and there are many cases where people have been discriminated because they're either very light or very dark-skinned, and so it's kind of oftentimes people associate color with race, which makes sense, but actually color is its own distinct aspect in this. Sex, of course, is male and female, and as we know, our society has changed quite a bit. We have transgendered. People may not want to identify. And again, when we're doing registrations, there's never a reason to force anybody to do that. If someone chooses not to identify, or they want to, you know, run a pencil through male and female and say something else, have at it, no problem. But as an educator, when you fill out your information following a program, you would just do your best guess on visual identity. Generally, that person presents as a female, or generally that person presents as a male, and call it a day. That's not an issue for us. Right? And then national origin is where the individual's country of origin would come from. It would be either that they literally came from another country recently, or their parents are from another country. And in the United States, under the Federal Office of Management and Budget, the expectation is to collect information whether the person is from a Hispanic background or a not Hispanic background. In fact, though, a national origin would be, you could be British, you could be Italian. There's lots of different backgrounds that a person could have, but in the United States and for the USDA, which is where we get our federal funding, the only thing they're looking at is whether a person is Hispanic or not, right? And there should be no discrimination in any programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance, and we all receive federal financial assistance. And so there is a question, Diane is asking, should we be adding the question to event registration? And we can talk about that. I say, Diane, if you would please remind me of that question a little bit later, and we can talk about that in depth. But we should be, as best we can, we should always make the attempt to ask the participant to provide their own information. That's the purest form of collection that the USDA expects us to do, but the reality is that we don't always get the information for a variety of reasons, and we understand that. And I really appreciate what John Kennedy was hinting at, or not even hinting at, but flat out saying, it's simple justice that if we collect tax dollars from people, that they should have the same access to the benefit of the use of those tax dollars, and that there shouldn't be any discrimination. Thank you very much for your tax dollars, but you can't come to this school, you can't come to this program, you're not welcome in this building. That is just, it's just not the way that the United States wants to be. So the core message for today is that Cornell Cooperative Extension is an organization that relies heavily on tax dollars, and certainly those federal tax dollars, which is where a lot of the compliance topics that I'll talk about today come from, but we also rely heavily on state and local tax dollars, and it really brings a heightened responsibility for this organization. And the other aspect of it is, for all that we're an educational organization, and we're built on research and knowledge and wisdom and the local information and knowledge and experience. We're also built on relationships and working with people, and so fundamentally taking care of people and treating them as they would like to be treated is just absolutely core to our organization developing and growing and thriving. So we'll be looking at that civil rights compliance component as related to those tax dollars. And my question to you, especially if you have not been here for this presentation in the past, does anybody know at what point those federal compliance obligations kick in? How many dollars do you have to receive? Does anybody want to put in the chat box how many dollars you have to receive in order to, before you have to start following the rules? And I'm getting some good answers. I'm going to answer a private question for just a second, and if people can put in what their guesses are, it'd be awesome. So we have some good guesses. James McNaughton put in, first he put 50,000, and that's actually a good guess because a lot of the requirements, often federal requirements, they often kick in at $50,000. And I happen to know that James is an HR professional. He's one of our state leads, and so I'm not surprised to see that answer from him. And Samantha Stryker's saying 1 cent. We've got another people, and in fact, you're right. The 1 centers are right. It's when you receive more than $0. And actually when Norman Pruitt, who is the national person at the USDA who we work with, he cuts it down. He's like, if you got half a penny, I'm going to come find it. He's a really nice guy, but he's serious about his work. So it is, yeah. So if you get more than $0, they take it seriously, and they do not, the federal folks are not like, where'd that dollar go? They're like, that dollar or that penny touches every aspect of what you do. It's like osmosis. It's supporting all of you. And while I'm kind of poking fun at our national partner, I do want to say they are a partner. They're super, they're there to help us do a good job. And when, you know, compliance is just such a tough word. I say compliance and people cringe, but compliance either here at the state level with the folks on in Extension Administration, or even compliance at the federal level like Norman Pruitt and the others that we work with, their job and our job is really to make sure we're getting it right. And the idea of getting it right is, of course, to take good care of the people who we work with out in throughout the state, but it's also so that we don't trip ourselves up and end up with a lawsuit or hurting someone and depriving someone of their rights. So it's really neither the state level nor the federal level are intended as a punitive role. It's really we're here to support. I know that sometimes it feels a little bit you know, all right, annoying, but it's really not intended to be that way. We really, the desire is to be supportive. So with those more than $0 become those civil rights obligations, and then also there are spending requirements. So if we have finance folks online, they know exactly what I'm talking about what's allowable and what's not allowable for spending on various types of funding. Certainly lots of restrictions, and then I think Celeste might still be on with us, but also we have a substantial reporting requirement that we have to make to the federal level, but also, as we mentioned, there are state and local levels, and so some of those may be addressed by the association, and then others like the state level reporting we also do hear from Extension Administration. So, you know, what if we don't comply? It looks like a lot of work, and you're talking about filling out a lot of papers, and you know, we like everybody, and I just don't see the problem. Why should we comply? For an organization, if there's a recipient of federal assistance and they're not complying with the law, and they're found to have discriminated, and they refuse to voluntarily comply with the laws that are in place, the federal agency, for us, that would be the USDA, they would either initiate fund termination, so they would withdraw all of the dollars that Cooperative Extension gets, the Cooperative Extension System gets, or alternatively, they can refer the matter to the Department of Justice for appropriate legal action. And with appropriate legal action, that can be criminal penalties, that can be civil penalties, which are obviously dollars. And the other thing that they can do is they can put a state association, organization, Cooperative Extension Association system under the jurisdiction of the Department of Labor. So there are states in the country that have literally had to present who they're planning to hire and get their hires approved because they have had in the past such blatant situation where there was discrimination. So on the whole, our state has a very positive approach to this, and we have a very good relationship with the federal government, so we have no worries there. But there are all those paperwork things and all the outreach things and tracking and trying to do a better job. Those are part of the things that we need to continuously work on. So how does the USDA ensure that organizations comply? So they have two kind of main things that they do. One is that they do a lot of education. So they have their own website and provide information to the public and also to their recipients of dollars, including us. So that would be their direct approach, and you also would see things on the news or in newspapers, for example, about potential settlements for black farmers or potential settlements for female farmers. So those are things where they're doing direct education about what the USDA does in the support of civil rights. Indirect is through all the subrecipients, so that would be us. So I'm obligated to do training, and our association and every single employee in the state of Cooperative Extension is obligated to have some form of civil rights training throughout the year, and then sexual harassment training every other year. Right? And so those are two methods that they use. Another method that the USDA ensures that we are in compliance is there is that annual federal reporting, so there is some tracking of the numbers that we send in. If there's a big blip, you know, that we dropped off and who's participating in our programs, we probably would get, you know, some kind of contact from the federal level. We've never had that. I wouldn't expect that we would, but they certainly have that authority. They also do random civil rights audits. So there's random, which is roughly about every 10 years they come and visit us. The last time was in 2009, but they could also just say, you know what, the schedule just speeded up and Sarah will be there in 30 days. And we'll be going to these counties, and we'd like this data, and if you could send it to us in 10 days, that'd be great. And we'll all be scrambling. But because we do have a good reputation and because we do have a good relationship, last time we got almost a year's notice before they came, which was pretty extraordinary. But in general, we want to stay on top of things all the time so that we're never in a scramble. And then in addition to the sort of random audits, any time that there's a complaint, they have an obligation to bounce it back. And actually, they would bounce it back to me and ask me to follow up on the complaint. Or alternatively, if a lawsuit comes up, if something goes to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and it is somehow connected with the Cooperative Extension System or USDA funding, that would also come to us. So these are all really important things to be aware of. So we have a question from Samantha, and Samantha is saying, if one association is in violation, would the whole system lose funding? And that's a really good question. If one association were in violation and it absolutely, and we knew it, and I was working with the association and the board of directors and the executive director absolutely refused to respond to requests, the director, Chris Watkins, would have an obligation to withdraw funding from that association. But that would be just a cataclysmic situation because the funding isn't just the literal dollars, the federal dollars that go to the association, but it's also the support that goes to the association in ways that you don't necessarily think of in terms of dollars. So that would be the HR support that you get here at the university. It would be the payroll support. So effectively, it would shut an association down if that ever happened. But no, it would not necessarily affect the entire system. However, if we have an audit and we had a very bad audit report, for example, I told you about other states where they had such bad reports that they ended up having Department of Justice oversight, something like that, not only will it jeopardize the cooperative extension funding, but it can, also jeopardize the funding to the university. So it would be a very serious situation. So it's a good question, and I cannot imagine this system ever being in that position, but it is really important that we're responsive when we each notice any challenge, and it's not just me, it's not just the executive director, it's not just the board of directors, it's not just the HR person, but it's every single employee has an obligation to step up, be observant of how our organizations run, and make those suggestions or voice concerns when things don't seem like they're headed in a good direction. So I really appreciate that question. So USDA Regulation 7 CFR 15. So CFR is a Code of Federal Regulations. That's where once a law is passed in the United States, it goes to the Code of Federal Regulations to be just maintained. It's documentation. In CFR 715, any recipient of federal financial assistance, regardless of the amount, is subject to civil rights reviews. So I've already mentioned that we get those. Further, the primary recipient of federal financial assistance is responsible for civil rights administration where the primary recipient has extended the financial assistance to another recipient. This includes funds, space, staff, support, anything supported in any way by those dollars. So what do you mean primary recipient or another recipient? Each level that has the money, so the USDA gets it from the federal government, and then the USDA passes on Smith-Lever dollars to Cornell University for the cooperative extension system. Cornell University passes it on to the associations, and then the associations may hire a subcontractor to do some additional work. They may collaborate with the local Farm Bureau, or they might do work with the United Way or the town office or any other collaborators that you work with. You might work with groups out there, certainly your program participants and your volunteers, including your boards of directors. The responsibility at each level is to ensure that you are following civil rights requirements, but also that anywhere that you've passed those dollars or support along, that those recipients are also responsible for their civil rights compliance. So this is, some of you may have heard in the past, there's some rule about not working with Boy Scouts, and I apologize for picking on Boy Scouts, but it's a really interesting example because our dads were Boy Scouts, our brothers might be Boy Scouts, we might have children in Boy Scouts. Our local Boy Scout group is awesome. They're great people, they never discriminate, they've never had an approach to discrimination. Unfortunately, they still have a requirement or a restriction on leaders who are gay. And so this is an organization that has a policy of discrimination, and I'm really impressed with what the Boy Scouts has done to open the organization. They're definitely progressing, but this is an organization where we could not turn around and make any kind of formal agreement or with them because they are restricted from receiving federal funds because of the organizational policy. So in this example, boys who are Boy Scouts are absolutely welcome to come to our programs, but if a troop leader said, hi, I'd like to bring all my guys in uniform, we would have to very politely ask them to please not do that because it presents an awkward situation for cooperative extension. And again, you know, I've mentioned it earlier, like these aren't the times to make a big deal about it. If someone inadvertently shows up with their Boy Scout troop and they're in uniform, I would take the leader aside and just let them know that this is awkward for you, and in the future if they wouldn't do that. But again, we're built on relationships and how we treat people, and we really wouldn't want to, you know, be disruptive or hurtful, but it's really important that people understand we have this legal obligation. So I have a question. Is this responsibility for all funds, even private dollars of donations, because we have federal dollars? And to the person who, Beth, can you just clarify that question, because I'm not quite sure I have it. So, and Diane is asking again, so we wouldn't want support from the Masons or other group that restricts membership to one gender. We really would want to be careful with those, and yes, I would say it puts us in a very difficult position. If you have an organization that is only open to men, we would not want to go present to the Masons, you know, or necessarily have just the Masons into a presentation. But if the presentation is open to all, if the Masons are willing to say, please bring your workshop here and everyone is welcome, that isn't necessarily a problem. And I actually have to think about that, because you could even say that, I mean, I could even make that same remark with the Boy Scouts. The problem is that it's gender discrimination, and it's a real challenge. I would say it's really important. I would not have my presentation in the Masons location, but they're certainly welcome, because it puts us in the same situation as Boy Scouts, that we wouldn't want to go, for example, to the Boy Scouts den, but say it's open to all. And part of it is the legal aspect, but part of it is also how it looks, you know, the perception of extension. And if we are working closely with an organization like Masons, you know, what is the impact on women that are in our community? There is that sense of being excluded from that opportunity, even if maybe for that night you're being welcome. So I would say, you know, as a general rule, we wouldn't want to work directly with an organization that has a policy of discrimination, but certainly those folks are welcome to open programs. And I'm going to go back. I have a couple questions. So Beth is saying we have special projects from a multitude of funders, some using private like foundations, others using public dollars. Are all collaborators, subcontractors, subject to the same scrutiny? So Beth, this is probably maybe a little bit more complex question that we would want to work through, but it's really clear, like if you are extending the support of your staff or your resources or subcontracting to an organization, say that you want to do an energy program and part of it is a small weatherization piece, and your educators do education, not construction, so you subcontract to a contractor to do a small piece of a project. The expectation is that those contractors would sign off that they follow a policy of non-discrimination. And it's a very typical, if you look at your county contracts, you'll see the same kind of language in your county contracts, because the counties are under the same restriction. As far as donations, that's a really tough one. My policy, my approach on that would be not to accept dollars from an organization that has a policy of discrimination, because oftentimes that donation gives them a right to use your name in promoting who they have supported. and then that links you with an organization. You know, I'm just making an example, but if that organization discriminates, you're now publicly associated with an organization that has a policy of discrimination, and it puts extension in an awkward position. And then we have a question about being gay. Being gay is not protected under Title VI, and that is correct. Being gay is not protected under, and Jim, thank you very much for this question. And it's the comment that I made about not working with Boy Scouts because they discriminate against gay individuals is actually Sandra law. Not working with Boy Scouts is because they're restricted to boys only and therefore are not eligible for federal funding. So that's actually it's a really good clarification. Do we have a list of national organizations that discriminate against gender or other aspects? And I actually don't, Jennifer. It's a really good question. And so when I go on I'm going to switch us over to the staff site in a few minutes, and there are some pieces that can help you work through this. We certainly know a couple of organizations that, you know, definitely have a particular stance, so it creates a barrier for us to work with those people directly in direct contract. But it's really not a good idea to make a list because they may change their policies, and we would hate to exclude them from working with us based on, for example, an old or out-of-date list. So we have an approach to assess whether an organization can meet the standards that we have to meet rather than a specific list. And I'm really sorry. Some people are saying that they're having still kind of a delay in audio transmissions, and sometimes it helps if you log off and log back on. So I'll just say that. And thank you for the questions. Jennifer's asking about the venture crew, which is part of the Boy Scouts, and it's both male and female. Jennifer, if the core organization is Boy Scouts, then the answer is probably no, but I'm not familiar with this, so I'd be happy to explore that with you further, and we can even send out a note to everyone once we get better information, or once I have better information on that. So good questions. So as I'm going through here, clearly, especially with the federal dollars, there is a civil rights obligation, and it's a knowledge of the civil rights laws. It's that we follow a policy of non-discrimination. We notify the public of our obligations and their rights. We offer equal program opportunity, and we offer equal employment opportunity. And those are, you know, saying we offer equal program opportunity and we offer equal employment opportunity, those are really two quick phrases, but they're very complex. And so we'll talk about them a little bit, but there's definitely more resources on pulling those apart. So there's a question about what if Boy Scouts want to work on a project to earn a badge and there's no money changing hands, is this acceptable? And in the past, we've really discouraged people from doing this. If a youth would like to volunteer for cooperative extension, it's perfectly appropriate for that youth and the Cooperative Extension Association to make an agreement about the project, the volunteer project that they might do. But the Boy Scout aspect of it should really be between that youth and their Boy Scout group, and not between Cooperative Extension and the Boy Scout group, right? And I hope that answers the question. And again, those are often complex ones, and I'm happy to have a phone conversation or an email exchange to kind of work through those, because we have had those in the past. Some haven't worked out, and some have been worked out just fine. Everybody was comfortable with meeting the requirements that Cooperative Extension has to meet. Right. So the obligation, I'm talking about this, and I keep just saying Cooperative Extension, but Cooperative Extension is included, as well as the New York State Agricultural Experiment Station, which is our research location, Cornell's research location in Geneva, New York. It also applies to Cornell University Agricultural Experiment Station, which is on campus, the College of Human Ecology, the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and the Veterinary College. Having said that, those are just USDA dollars. For the whole university, there are those same requirements, but the jurisdiction may be under different federal agencies. So the USDA is where we get the dollars from, so that's who we answer to. The university may answer to the Department of Education, USDA, Foreign Ag Service, I've seen that. So there's all sorts of, it just depends on where your dollar stream is. So this applies to everybody, but our particular responsibility is to the USDA. So the Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and I think I might be a little bit repetitive here because no person in the United States shall, on the grounds of race, color, sex, or national origin, be excluded from participation in or denied the benefits of or otherwise be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Right? And so I'm just going to pop through some laws pretty quickly just so you know what's involved, but we won't necessarily go into these in depth, but people should, across our system, should have a basic knowledge of what laws are included. So these are amendments to the original law as well as incorporating pieces of the original law as I go through these. So Title IX Education Amendments of 1972 is that there should be no discrimination on the basis of sex. And of course we say sex because it's a physiological, male, female. Gender is a social construction if you have spent any time in those studies. And so gender is how a person presents themselves and how society views a person, but sex is the physiological basis of the direction of the law. But again, and I think Jim brought up some of these issues earlier, we have all sorts of presentations and manifestations of how people present themselves, and certainly since 1972, society has advanced. There are additional laws and expectations, and so of course the expectation is that we wouldn't discriminate against anyone. And this would be in any kind of opportunities, in program, in employment, who has opportunities, who gets promoted, who gets to be a leader, who gets to be a volunteer. Any of those aspects should not be on the basis of gender. I do want to say, as we're looking at this particular slide and talking about sex, we have a system of about 1,600 people, and I think somewhere around 80% of the system is female. But oftentimes, and up until the last couple, maybe even the last 8 or so years, executive director positions were often male. Boards of directors were often male. So a lot of the history of this organization and a lot of the ways that things might have been set up may have been a little bit more developed under a male-dominated system. And I don't in any way, I'm not saying that that's bad, but it does give a particular view to some of the things that we do. And so if there are times that you see that our organization may be more oriented towards females or more oriented towards males, it's one of those moments to check ourselves and say, is this really the best that we can do? Is there a better way to set things up? So I just wanted to take a moment there. And then I have a question, and it's a really good question, thank you so much, about are we responsible for ensuring that volunteers have diversity training? And it's not necessarily that volunteers have to have diversity training, but they have to be aware of the fact that they also are obligated to follow the same policy of non-discrimination. As well, are program participants, and we have the responsibility to enforce it. So if you have 2 program participants who are acting in any sort of discriminatory way, the educator or the executive director or whoever can come to the aid of the educator has an obligation to make sure that people are treating each other in a non-discriminatory fashion. And we have had cases where an educator could not get the participants to stop the behavior. In some cases, the program literally was ended at that moment. Just, this is it, we're done. We're not going to continue with this. It was a youth program. In other cases, we've had situations where a youth has been requested to stop coming to a program because of the behavior. So we do have that obligation, and it is entirely possible, we've never had it, it's entirely possible that a program participant could sue the association because they're subject to discrimination. So that's why, good question, it is really important that everyone knows that they're expected to behave in a non-discriminatory way. With volunteers, we have had times where volunteers have said, I'd really like to volunteer for you, but I won't work with gay people, or I won't work with women. And we thank them very much for their offer, but that is not acceptable. And it really is, and so I would say the best practice would be to say, I really appreciate that you're interested in this organization, but our interests are different and it's just not a good fit. I suppose that there are probably times where people are aware of someone who, a volunteer who has certain preferences and maybe they assign them in a way, but realize that you're taking a risk with that because you really cannot control all environments, and especially if you have awareness that a volunteer, I'll just say, discriminates against gay people, and so you've set it up so they wouldn't work with gay people, but then they come into contact with gay people and act in a discriminatory fashion, the association would be liable. So that's why it's really important to keep the big picture in mind and think that through. Thanks for that question. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is starting to, the United States is starting to look at the rights of disabled individuals. And so at that point, it was looking at just no discrimination on the basis of a person having disability, and no discrimination on the basis, if you are receiving federal financial funds, you cannot discriminate in programs, employment, or access to electronic or information technology. So this is sort of the first layer of when we were looking in the United States, looking at supporting individuals with disabilities. In 1967, we had no discrimination on the basis of age, that's over the age of 40. New York State has a law, and there is no, in New York State, you cannot discriminate on the basis of anyone's age. It doesn't matter how young or how old. There are, unless it's a safety issue, so there are laws for pilots, but we don't have any pilots in the state that I'm aware of, working for CCE. And also there are certain legal restrictions. For example, there are certain types of equipment that individuals under the age of 18 can't operate, and so there would be laws that might restrict it, but it wouldn't be that you could, we wouldn't give so-and-so a job because he just seems so young, or, he couldn't possibly have enough experience because he's young. Right? Same as we wouldn't do on the other end, that person could never learn the technology because they're older and whatever. So the next layer with Americans with Disabilities went further than the Rehabilitation Act. This took it the next level, and that not only can we not discriminate against the individual, but we actually also were starting to see substantial concerns about people with family members that had disabilities, and so there was no discrimination on the basis of having a family member with a disability, but also it stepped it up a bit and said employers or program providers have to take steps to minimize or eliminate barriers. And so I'll have, again, when we go to the web pages, I'll talk a little bit more about this. But this is a very substantial thing, and especially because you're looking at 1990, that's 24 years ago. So 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was, we talked about mainstreaming, and I know when I was in high school, it was students were mainstreamed, and the youth in a wheelchair was in our classroom because she had been mainstreamed. And now it's just a fact of life. Society has changed, our buildings have changed, our policies have changed, societal expectations have changed. And so this is just a part of life now. It's not, anything like mainstreaming. So with that, realize that the youth that are in our programs now and their parents, they have all grown up in an entirely different society under different laws and have much different expectations than some of us who are in the workforce now grew up with. And so we may face with program participants much more savvy, much more aware of their rights, but also much more aware of approaches that can be taken to accommodate them. So this is not in any way a bad thing, but it is important that we are savvy as an organization to what's out there and what we might face. And I will say that New York State has, to my knowledge, the last time I checked, we have the highest rate of disabled individuals in the United States. And then we have an aging population, and realize that our country has been engaged in war, and in the war and with medical technology, injuries that might in the past have killed an individual now leave them disabled, whether it's traumatic brain injuries or limb loss. So those are presenting a whole new level of challenge, not only to the medical industry, but also to employers and every type of program provider. So this is definitely something. We know that there are new laws coming at the federal level that will impact our organization over the next year that we'll be talking more about. But this is a place to really be open to what people are asking for and try to accommodate people as best we can. Executive Order 13166, this refers to limited English proficiency, and again, when you look at the census data that came out in 2010, we know that there's been a pretty big shift in the demographics of not just the United States, but New York State in particular. We know that we are a state that's attractive to people from other countries, and so we do often have folks who speak another language. As a recipient of federal funds, there is an obligation to provide reasonable accommodations, right? And I'll keep saying reasonable accommodations. So it's important that we don't discriminate against an individual because they do not speak English as their first language. We want to be especially attentive if there's a large population in our community. If the folks in that group have many contacts with our organization, and if there are health and safety concerns. So, for example, if you have a large population of individuals from another country and they come to your Cooperative Extension Association, say for nutrition programming, and this would be a health issue, then you would have an obligation to provide materials in, for example, Spanish, if that was their first language. Realize that you do not have to have the materials in your association, everything translated. You could draw upon resources that you find at other land-grant universities or just other resources. Some associations have had materials transcribed or translated. Other associations, there are certain associations that no longer hire educators who are not bilingual because they know that they face such a diversity of language that it's critical now to be bilingual. And that's not a requirement, but it's a real, I mean, that's a very impressive level of meeting the need in their communities. And there are lots of resources. There are resources on the web. And if you have found resources that are useful, please do share those. In certain cases, it's especially important. For example, if you are offering pesticide training, lead abatement, any of those types of courses where there are serious health and safety issues, it's really important that those materials have been translated into Spanish, or you're using EPA materials that have been translated into whatever language the person is using, especially because of the health and safety concerns. Okay. I mentioned this earlier. Sexual Orientation Non-Discrimination Act, SONDA, this is a New York State law, and again, talking about look at the change in our society and in fact, the speed of change, particularly with gay rights, has been very impressive. This particular law, and it is a state law, but it's important because it affects our New York State and cooperative extension. It prohibits discrimination on the basis of actual or perceived sexual orientation, and that's in housing, employment, public accommodations, education, credit, and the exercise of civil rights. And so in the course of, maybe 6 or 7 years that I've been here, I've seen, people have their own views. We do not shed who we are, how we've grown up, the experiences that we had, and that's understandable. But it's really important that we, as leaders of our organization, as supervisors, and as employees of this organization, that we understand what the expectations are and help set a culture that no matter what people might think at home, while we're in the workplace, there is a very clear cultural expectation and openness to diversity and creating a welcoming environment. So, I have dealt with cases where people brought sort of how they think about things on their off time into work, and it creates serious liability issues for the organization, but also it creates a really unpleasant situation for the employee who's experiencing this discrimination. And again, I want to say, it's not the executive director, it's not just the board of directors, it's not just the director of extension, it's every single one of us every single day. Look out for each other, be aware, do the best that we can for each other in the organization. So to that end, the cooperative extension policy of non-discrimination is very broad. So it brings in federal law, it brings in state law, and then it brings in organizational policy requirements or expectations. So it's much broader than just that very narrow civil rights requirement at the federal level. So no person shall be denied admission to any educational program or activity or be denied employment on the basis of any legally prohibited discrimination involving, but not limited to, such factors as race, color, religion, political beliefs, national or ethnic origin, gender, sexual orientation, age, marital or family status, veteran status, or disability. And I just want to pause here. You can see it's very broad. Sometimes when people are doing programs and they're doing registration, they like to collect a lot of information about their program participants in an effort to help develop programs that are very relevant to the program participants' lives. And in the past, I've seen people ask questions about things like marital status or family status as an example. I caution you on collecting that kind of data, because if you collect it, you really want to be in a position that you can demonstrate you are not using that in any way to discriminate against people. So it's always a little bit of an awkward thing. There have been times where people have needed that data for a very specific reason, but I think, our society has changed a tremendous amount, and marital status may not give you as much information as you need. You really might want more like household status, who lives in the home, numbers of adults and children, rather than a marital status, married or not married kind of thing. So it's just something to keep in mind when you do collect data, but it is really important. Cornell Cooperative Extension and Cornell University and the National Cooperative Extension System take this very seriously. This is an organization, we don't discriminate, and if we find that we're not doing as well as we would like to, we should be working on it. So, as I mentioned, we do have an obligation to let people know about who we are and who we are as an organization relative to those civil rights compliance requirements. So we do have to notify the public that we have a policy of non-discrimination, and so that's why on our email, on our job position descriptions in the newspaper, when you do a workshop flyer, that equal program and employment opportunity statement should be at the bottom of those. Anytime you are making contact with the public, you should have that in there. We should let people know that we have an ADA policy, that we don't discriminate. And again, it's really important. Those should go on your workshop notices. But it's also important to protect the association. You don't want to face, a request with 2 hours to go. So it's important to give them a contact person, a phone number or email address to contact, and then please let us know at least a week before the program or something. So that protects you, so that you're not trying to do cartwheels at the last minute. And then everyone has a right to lodge a complaint. You have a right as an employee to lodge a complaint. A program participant has a right to lodge a complaint, right? We absolutely never interfere with a person's right to do that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then it's important, the Justice for All poster, which I'm hopeful everyone has up in any public space that you rent or own. So if you have a farm, put it on the wall. If you have a workshop room, put it on the wall. If you regularly use a particular room, put it on the wall. If you randomly, if you set up here and there, or you might do some presentations in a faith-based organization, and then you run over to the school and do a presentation. I've known educators to actually tape the presentation, or excuse me, the poster to their computer. So when they flip up their laptop, the poster drops down so you can see it. We have had examples where in FNAP where they were audited during a presentation, and one of the audit findings was that they didn't have the Justice for All poster. The university recently underwent a federal audit, different, not the USDA, but it was of the whole university. Before they came, I went through all the list of things that I'm going through with you, and for some reason the Justice for All poster didn't stick in my instructions. They were in there, I gave them the poster, I gave them the link, but somehow the folks that were getting ready for the audit, they just didn't get the posters up, and it was one of the audit findings was that we didn't have the Justice for All poster up. And when I say we, it wasn't Cooperative Extension, and it wasn't CALS or Human Ecology. It was one of the other colleges on campus. So it is really important, and the nice thing about the Justice for All poster is it actually has a summary of all this information. It's freely available on the website. You can just Google it, and I have in another slide I have the web address. But the other thing is it's also accessible in I don't know how many languages, maybe 30 languages. So if you do have an audience with another language, it's really nice to be able to provide that for them. I do have a couple of, I guess just one question, but will the slides be available? And they will be. I am recording this presentation, and I probably may end up re-recording. And then I'll actually have a sign-in for people, not the folks that are on here because you've already registered, but for others to say when they took the trainings, just so we have a record of it, and then I can maintain that record for your executive directors. So the slides will be available, and I'm happy to provide them to you as slides. So if you would like to turn around and share this with your coworkers, I'm happy to facilitate that. Right. As I said, this is in continuing in our obligations to notify the public. We do have that complaint procedure. If you have an employment complaint, the procedure is determined by your college or unit, so I also do this presentation with campus folks. Typically within an association, you have your own path that you take, so you go to your supervisor. The next level would often be the executive director. The next level would be your board of directors. We do have a complaint policy, I think it's 1301, and it tells you the process to take. There is a HR hotline that comes to Melissa Reif and myself. There's a USDA address there at the bottom. People have a right to complain, and we never want to interfere with that. The USDA perspective and my perspective, Melissa's perspective, Cooperative Extension's perspective, is that we want to address the complaint. It isn't about assigning blame or anything like that. It's about making sure that we have the best organization that we can. And the USDA is really good about that. If they get a complaint, they pop it right back to us, and they just want us to address it. They just want us to know that it's happened. If we don't address it, then, of course, it becomes escalated. if a person throughout the state had a concern about any kind of research that was going on in the state and they felt that they were discriminated against in any way, Mark Schrader, who's an assistant director in the College of Ag and Life Science, would be available to them for a complaint. I'm available for New York State for program complaints and also for employment complaints, but I'm not typically the first person. So, any questions there? Okay, so here's the poster that I mentioned. Sorry, it's not a terrific slide. And there is the address where it's available, but honestly, you can just Google Justice for All and you'll get it. And you can always get, as I said, lots of languages, so it's really a nice resource. And you can print them off, hang them up, and you're good to go. So the next level to talk about is the expectation that we offer equal program opportunity, and this is a really brief review of this. The concept of equal program opportunity is that people have an equal opportunity to influence the types of programs that we do. So this is part of the stakeholder process. It also has to do with who can be volunteers. How widely do we seek out boards of directors? Are the boards of directors representative of who lives in the county or the region? And that is representative in terms of race, gender, and ethnicity. Obviously, there are broader definitions of diversity than those, but that's what the focus is for the USDA, so that's kind of the focus of this presentation. But it's really important if you're in a situation where you have a board of directors that is, for example, all male or all female or all white, but you're in one of the counties that has 10, 15% black residents, it becomes a little bit difficult to understand, and the USDA will definitely be asking this question in an audit. Why do you have, and I think we have 12 counties with over 15% or in the neighborhood of 15% diversity as relative to black individuals, but almost no black participants on our boards. This is a concern, and the reason it's a concern is that we know that influence changes the types of programs that we do. It might change the topics of our programs, the focus of our program, where we offer that program, times of day that we offer that program. So not just at that level, but then oftentimes what program you offer might attract different people. And so if we look at our programs, and each association should do this, look at the distribution of demographics, white, black, and others in your community, and then look at your program demographics. If you're seeing a disparity between who lives in your community and who comes to your program, and then you look up and see that all of your boards and all of your program advisory committees say are white, maybe this is starting to create a pattern. And it's not that we're trying to do anything negative. We're not intentionally discriminating, but we're missing opportunities. And we also know that lots of our programs are pipelines for future employees. So if our program participants are largely white, and we know that oftentimes we hire people who have been in the past program participants, then it means that the pools that we're drawing from for employment are also largely white. And now we're starting to get into a situation where we didn't mean to discriminate, but in fact the process is discriminatory even though we didn't intend to be. So it's really important every time we look at our advisory committees, every person out there who has a role in putting together volunteer leaders or program advisory committees or boards of directors, these are times to really spend the effort to reach out. But again, it doesn't happen in a few minutes. Those are things that take a long time. So each of us wants to draw on the people that we know and the contacts that we have. Again, it goes all back to the relationships and the people who live out there. And so I have a question. Would providing translated fact sheets, for example, at a program be a reasonable accommodation for limited English proficiency? So Jennifer is asking if she's doing a program, and if she just provides a translated fact sheet, would that be acceptable? So Jennifer, again, each of these really has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. So if you're doing a nutrition programming and you know for a fact that you have 20% Hispanic individuals who speak Spanish as a first language in your community, and they are likely to be a big participant group for you, just providing a nutrition program in English and then handing a translated sheet to a large percentage of your program participants probably would not be a sufficient accommodation. So this is why some of our associations have gone to hiring bilingual educators. But if this, so what that is a stable condition. You know that you have a large population, so the association should be responsive to that. You should be anticipating that. However, if you are presenting your nutrition program and people who speak Spanish show up, there was no warning, you didn't know, you've looked at the demographics of your county and it's less than 5% speak Spanish, that would be a little bit different situation. And so in that case, handing out a fact sheet might be appropriate at that point. But if you start to see a trend, we need to be responsive to the trend. And I realize that this, I can hear it, it costs money and it costs time, but it is a federal expectation. But there are, reasonable accommodation means there's lots of ways that we can meet that. So again, it's a little bit of a case-by-case basis, unless you have an association which is in a county where you know you have a large population and you know you have lots of contacts with them, and particularly if it's a health or safety concern. So I talked a little bit about influence. Access, the idea that people should all have access to programs. Equal doesn't always mean exactly the same. So if I'm deaf, I'm not going to experience the program the same way a person who is not deaf, but I should still be able to access the information in a way that works for me. And so again, we would want to be responsive to that need. And then certainly benefit is the same degree that people should benefit from the programs in their community. This applies to our programs, it applies to our collaborators, the materials, communications, staff, volunteers, boards, and program participants. And it's really across the board. And this is really very light treatment of the concept of equal program opportunity. We have other presentations that we go more in depth, and I'll point to those in just a few minutes. And Jennifer, I hope I answered your question. It's a really good question. One of the documents that we have as an organization is our Affirmative Action Diversity Inclusion Plan, and this is where a lot of these requirements and the information and guidance on how to carry out these requirements for us are listed. So we first distributed it in 1996, and it really was an organizational development tool. It's a resource to the associations. It is annually reviewed by the boards of directors and signed off on by the executive director. It includes our laws, our organizational expectations. There's an implementation guide in there, and there are also resources in there. There is a mapping requirement and expectation that we look annually at the data that you turn into Celeste Carmichael, the race, gender, ethnicity data of who's coming into your program, and then compare that to the demographics of your county and look at who's coming in as compared to who lives in the county. And one of the things to especially draw your attention is that if you're seeing a tremendous amount of diversity in your youth programs and a tremendous amount of diversity in your nutrition programs, but if the diversity in your program participants is concentrated there and it doesn't extend to your other programs, you're missing an opportunity. So you're clearly already connecting with those folks, but we haven't figured out how to translate that into broad inclusion in our programs. And so this is where you might start thinking about the people that you do work with. How can we encourage them to be volunteers? How can we encourage them to be on our board of directors? How can we get them on a program advisory committee and make our other programs as accessible and interesting and appealing and relevant? So it's very, very important. And I will tell you, I haven't looked at the data closely in a while, but we do have really big pockets of diverse folks, and I'm typically talking about Black individuals, concentrated in our nutrition and youth programming, and then absent in our other programs. And oftentimes, some of the feedback I'll get is, well, you know, we do a lot of ag programs, and so, you know, not so many black farmers. And I think there's somewhere around 1,000 black farmers in New York State, so I would say that's, you're pretty accurate there. And yet, we do have black farmers in the state, and the two fastest growing areas in agriculture, according to U.S. Census, Ag Census, is Hispanic and female farmers. So it might not be that you have a tremendous amount of black individuals in your ag programs, but look at what's going on with Hispanics and women, and so that might be your goal in your county, right? And all of those data are available to you online. Okay. Right, I'm just checking the chat. Right? And so the same with mapping with program participants, we also have affirmative action requirements to effectively map who works for our organization, and then look at whether it's a local pool, a state pool, or a national pool, and look at who's available, what is the diversity, race, gender, ethnicity of who's available in the potential people who could be employees. And again, Cooperative Extension has work to do in diversifying or reaching out to a broad diversity of employees. Now, I will say, you know, it's something most organizations are always working on, so we should be setting those goals for ourselves, and we should always be able to demonstrate the outreach that we've done. I know that we're working on campus on changing some approaches and making more support available to associations to help on this. But each association, when you do searches, you do want to follow your HR lead folks on the policies and procedures and make sure that our searches are meeting minimum requirements and that we're documenting that. So we should always have those goals, and then always document the efforts that we're taking to make sure that we can demonstrate we are working on this, right? And I know that there will be additional presentations are planned for the future to address that for associations and with the HR folks. Right, so I'm going to share my, and we're going to spend a few minutes on the website. And people can pop in with any questions, but I won't be able to see them for just a minute. All right, so what we're looking at is the Cornell Cooperative Extension Professional Development staff page. And the first page here, I just want to draw your attention to, you'll see at the top the Title VI Civil Rights Compliance presentation is what we're doing right now. But also look at the resources that are available to you and your staff. Kim Fleming is doing a presentation on recruiting and retaining diverse volunteers. Eduardo Gonzalez has a wonderful presentation on unconscious bias, which is really important in sort of framing people's head. It isn't that we're an organization that might be actively and intentionally discriminating, but sometimes we don't realize how we've set our policies or procedures up. And so this is a nice check-in on that kind of aspect of our organization. We have Making It Work with Diverse Teams. We have CCE supervisor development coming up, which covers these a lot of the laws that we're talking about. And the supervisor development program is taught by me and Melissa Reif, and a lot of that is really focusing on the organizational culture and incorporating some of what we're talking, but also how does it play out as a supervisor. So if you haven't taken it, even if you're not a supervisor, it's an outstanding training program. It was put together by the university. We've been training it here for probably 10 years. And if you've taken it before and you want a refresher, if you've taken it more than 3 or 4 years ago, you might want to come back because the program's been updated, and the participants have been very appreciative. We've gotten really nice feedback. There's a presentation coming up on crucial conversations. Workplace bullying and impact on teams. Again, this is workplace culture. So those are just some opportunities. Just wanted to draw your attention there. Now, if you look on the left-hand side under professional development, you'll see an equal program opportunity. You can actually get to this link either through the diversity and inclusion link or directly here. Right? And as we went through the presentation today, I talked about a number of ADA and you know, how do you work with a collaborator? And so there are links here for all of those topics. So this actually goes back, we initially put this back together in 2008. These documents are as effective and accurate today as they were then. Eventually it will probably go through and you know, update the dates and things like that, but the work has not changed, so we haven't taken the time to do that. I just want to take you down through. I talked about participant mapping, and that is a requirement, an annual requirement of the Affirmative Action and Diversity Inclusion Plan that you should be looking at who's coming to your programs. So there's a workbook there to go through. You'll see that there are presentations available to you. There are limited English proficiency sources that I talked about earlier. Here's a specific one that you might want to take a look at. This is the partnering policy and affirmation. So I'm going to open that up. Right? And so you would put this on your local letterhead. This is when you're making a working agreement with another organization. And an organization may either provide to you their policy of non-discrimination, or they can agree to abide by our policy of non-discrimination. The only time it really doesn't work is if the policy, if the organization has a known policy of discrimination, they can't refute their own policy. And this is unfortunately one of the challenges we've run into, for example, with Boy Scouts is we have local organizations that do not follow the national policy, but the problem is even though they don't follow it, they're under it, and we haven't been able to avoid that. So I just wanted to bring your attention to this. You should be having organizations sign off on this when you're doing collaborative work with them, and these should be maintained for 3 years after you are done with that organization. In the event of an audit, you could be asked to produce this material. Oh. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of a difficulty here. I won't go back because we have just a few minutes and I'd like to leave time for questions, but I would like to say, as far as the Americans with Disabilities Act, there is a 2-page document, and I know that we're heading into camp season especially. I know that the camps are phenomenally well run, and I'm incredibly impressed with the directors who are involved with those. They've done just a phenomenal job. There are materials on the page that I just showed you that help you walk through with an individual who might have a disability to request what they're interested in as far as an accommodation, and then some approaches that you can take. Turning down a request for accommodations is a very dicey thing. We want to be very careful with that. So there are it's a pretty clear page. Every single person should be treated individually. You know, we would never say, well, this is what we do for blind people, or this is what we do for deaf people. Each person, by law, is expected to be individually assessed and discuss with them what they need. So I would say if you run into any kind of ADA questions, just look at that, please. It's really important. And so, yes, the cat photo. That would be Sam the cat. So I'm going to leave the last few minutes if anyone has any questions. I really appreciate that people took the time. The questions were really good today, and I think it's really helpful for all of us. We do have lots of really good webinars coming up. If you find that the scheduling of our webinars is tough for you, or you have suggestions about that, please let us know, because we're trying to be as useful to you as possible. But if you don't tell us what's not working, we don't have any way of knowing. So I'm going to pause, and if we're done, and I appreciate you joining, I will send out the slides to folks. I'm happy, again, to make those available to you as a PowerPoint. So if you'd like to turn around and do the presentation yourself, have at it. And again, any questions? So one question is if we have a discrimination claim, does CCE help associations with legal defense of claims, or is this left up to individual associations? Great question. The association is liable. So it's really important. The first thing you do is, if you had a claim, let your board of directors know. Second thing you do is make sure your directors and officers insurance is paid up. Should be paid up every year. Don't ever let that lapse. And then the third thing you would do is call PW Wood, which is your risk management and insurance company. And the fourth thing you do is let me and your state extension specialist know. And probably all those things within a matter of like 5 minutes, all right? So because you want to get people on board. If there is a legal claim, you need to start protecting documents and collecting information, and you also oftentimes need to shut down communications. You often need to appoint a single person to be the point person and take questions. Staff shouldn't be answering, responding to random questions. So it's a pretty quick response, but that is the legal, it's a legal liability of the association. And I do want to say, I know the compliance stuff can be a pain, and it takes a lot of work, and it's paperwork, and it's time-consuming, and it's costly. But I've only actually been in charge of risk management for about, I guess, 2 years or 18 months or something. And in that time, I've seen a number of issues. And when people have followed policy and they followed the procedures, it's like clockwork. So I've seen associations be sued, and it's no fun, and there are some costs involved, but if they've followed policy, if they've followed their HR people's guidance on how to put their search together, if they've followed the rules, it's just an unpleasant thing you have to go through, but it's not a real risk. And so I've seen them. I mean, we had one where an association was sued, and it just was the EEOC came in, and it was just as clean as could be because people followed the policies. They're no fun, and oftentimes people are like, why are we doing all this stuff? But you're doing it not for the good days, but for the bad days. So, great question. Who represents the association? So PW Wood is often involved. The insurance company, it depends. If it's an actual legal claim, because sometimes you get a notice of claim and it's just like, I'm going to sue you if I feel like it. At that point, you might want local legal counsel. If you are if a legal claim is literally filed, an official one, it may, depending on the situation, it may be the insurance company that provides the attorney. So it's very much a case-by-case basis. But so I probably didn't quite answer your question, but realize that you may have local counsel involved just to give you local guidance, and then PW Wood and the insurance company. The insurance company, in some cases, has provided the attorney, and PW Wood has an extensive network and can give you names of people that you might choose, attorneys that you might want to work with, and often can help us with attorneys who have worked with cooperative extension, because we are sort of a quirky organization. Okay, so a couple of questions. Is the non-discrimination policy form mandatory for groups we have collaborative relationships with? It really is. We have to find out if they follow a policy of non-discrimination, and it's one of those compliance things. It's a kind of a pain in the neck, but if there's a lawsuit or something and then we don't have it in place, you have no cover. And if an auditor comes and says, who are you working with, and you say A, B, and C, and they say, where are your collaboration agreements, then it's an audit finding. So, and it may be you know, some of the organizations, like a school district, you wouldn't have to do it with because they follow a policy of non-discrimination by law, a public school district. But if you're working with a private school district, they may have different requirements, and so then you would have to. So there's a question, could you let us know where the non-discrimination form with another organization is? The person who's sending me that question, you might want to email me afterwards and realize we've done presentations on this. I do this presentation once a year. We have the materials online, but it's easy to forget this stuff. If you don't have this stuff in place, do not kick yourself. Just start doing it, all right? You know, we'll just start with where we are. So some associations said, geez, you know, we've had new executive directors. They got there. They're like, nobody's been doing mapping. Okay, let's just go. Let's just figure it out and go from here. So don't stress over if you're missing pieces. Let's just start filling in the blanks. Any other questions? Okay, well, oops. Yeah, I really appreciate that. One of the HR leads just sent me a note that it might be helpful that EDs and staff can reach out to SBN HR leads. And let me just tell you, I am so phenomenally impressed with the HR leads. I work with them more. I know that the finance leads and the IT leads are doing a great job too. I hear great things from them. But the HR leads are just, I just have to say they're blowing my socks off. They are just so active and so in tune with the concerns that we need to be aware of, and they're picking things up that you know, I might not be seeing or Melissa might not be seeing, and in some cases I feel like they're even getting out ahead of us and saying, hey, don't forget about this. So please use your HR leads. They're just phenomenal. So everybody have a great day. I think we're up to 2 degrees here. It's supposed to get to 25. If anybody's here from Saranac Lake, I'm really sorry about that -30 this morning. I hope you guys stay warm. Thanks so much for joining today.